Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to our YouTube series on polymer materials in PPE and then also in healthcare.
Yeah, in our previous installment, we talked a bit about polymers for biomedical adhesive type applications. We talked about how that can be from minor cuts and scrapes all the way through to some moderate, sized cuts and injuries.
Right, and in this installment, we're going to describe the polymers that are used in sutures.
Okay, so I guess the question is, when can people expect to need sutures rather than just being able to use a bandage?
Yeah, so this is typically needed when the cut is rather deep or in the case of a deliberate incision, such as what occurs in surgery.
Right. So in those cases, the superglue approach or bandages slash band-aid type approach we discussed in our previous video probably wouldn't work.
Exactly. And just to reassure our viewers, we're not going to be showing any images of surgery or severe cuts here today. Instead, we want to focus on the polymer science that makes healing from these possible.
So maybe we should sort of ask ourselves is what are the properties of sutures or stitches that we're going to want? What are sort of material properties we're looking for?
That's a really good question. Ultimately, we want a fiber forming material. So this is something that it's strong in tension, and as the surgeon actually inserts the stitches, but it's something that also as the person moves around, we don't want those stitches to pop open or tear.
Right. Another thing that many modern sutures have is the ability to dissolve or biodegrade over time. And that can have some really big advantages for the patient.
That's a very interesting feature. So why is that such an advantage?
Well, it really comes down to this idea of not needing to schedule a second visit with the healthcare practitioner to actually remove the sutures. So if the sutures are permanent or don't degrade over time, then the patient needs to see the surgeon again to sort of remove those sutures, after they've already been installed and the wounds healed.
Right. So if the sutures biodegrade over a time frame of months, or at least as long as it takes for the wound to heal, then the patient does not have to have another appointment to remove the sutures.
Exactly. So that can be a huge, advantage to the patient. It really decreases the chances of infection upon the second visit, in addition to the, convenience of the process, and actually reduces the pain, that the patient would experience.
Okay, so let's bring it back to the polymer materials that are really used in these sutures. So what are the polymers in those sutures?
Well, sort of as we mentioned before, there are, sort of the biodegradable ones and the non-biodegradable sutures. And, these are also called absorbable or non-absorbable, with sort of that idea of the absorbable sutures degrade in the body, dissolve over a period of, say, weeks to months.
Right, and so the types of polymers used in the biodegradable materials are they're quite different from those in the non-degradable materials. So in particular, the biodegradable ones have relatively weak bonds, which can be broken down by enzymes or even the water that's found in the body.
Right. Whereas the sort of non-degradable ones have stronger bonds that typically don't break down as easily. Um, so how does that degradation work really in practice?
Well, if we think about the biodegradable polymers, they can be thought of as long molecules, so a bit like noodles at the molecular level.
Yeah, and so when those noodles break down into smaller pieces, the interactions with the other molecular scale noodles are reduced and the overall material becomes quite a bit weaker.
Right. Then, by using stronger bonds that do not break down as easily, the polymers maintain those long molecular structures, those long noodle like structures, and then they do not lose their mechanical properties. On the other hand, the biodegradable ones that do lose those long noodle like structures, they end up getting shorter and shorter and eventually lose their strength.
Right, so it kind of leads to the question of what are some of those materials used in the non-biodegradable type sutures?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're actually going to take a look at that now. So, two of the more commonly used polymers are actually polypropylene, which our viewers have seen in other examples in our videos, such as the masks videos, as well as nylon. So we see polypropylene here in purple, and then nylon is shown in blue. What's really interesting about nylon is that the linkage in nylon is a peptide bond. And that's the same link or same type of bond that's found in proteins in the body. And that type of bond that actually leads to the longevity of that material. It's similarly to how the body does not want proteins just spontaneously degrading.
Yeah, and in fact, it was the peptide bond that inspired the original development of nylon by Wallace Carruthers. So silk was actually which is a protein-based polymer material. So proteins are polymers, and so the silk was the original inspiration of nylon. We wanted to mimic the same sorts of bonds in nylon as there is in silk.
Okay, so we discussed a bit about how stronger bonds, such as the one in nylon, those peptide bonds, or the bonds in polypropylene, lead to sutures with a long lifetime. Really, good strength there. So, how about the other case of the dissolvable or the degradable sutures?
Right. In those sort of cases, we're going to want relatively weaker linkers that can be broken down by water over a time frame of, say, weeks to months.
Exactly. So in this case, we're going to use a different type of linker. Often these are going to be esters, which are much more easily attacked and broken by water. For example, the polymer polyglycolic acid, which is shown in red on the screen now, or a copolymer of glycolic acid and caprolactone, which is shown in green, can be used to introduce those ester bonds into the polymer. And the key thing is that the polyesters in these structures are stable over short periods of time, such as, let's say, a week or two, but they break down as we get into the time frame of many weeks or months.
Yeah, so polyesters are sort of not unique to medical sutures, are they?
Absolutely not. Polyesters are used in applications ranging from soda bottles to clothing, even disposable cups.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how the same types of linkers to make polymer materials can actually be applied to lots of different systems with different target uses.
Yeah, this is really one of the most fascinating things about polymer science is we can often turn one type of polymer into another. For example, people are selling polyester clothes that are made from recycled water bottles.
Yeah, that's huge, and that actually holds real promise in terms of a more sustainable plastics economy, right? The idea that we're going to turn one type of polymer material into something else which is at least equal, possibly even higher value, right? Like a plastic water bottle has very little value, but a pair of clothes actually might have a higher value.
That's right. And as we start to think more about polymers and biomedical applications in this video series, we're really seeing just how much of modern medicine really is enabled by polymer science.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of wraps up our sort of discussion of sutures, but we're definitely not done with this series, and stay tuned as we discuss a really topical area that's getting a lot of attention right now, which is polymers used in vaccines. That's going to be in our next installment.
Yep. Catch you in the next installment.